channel. So this is Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald is an absolute patriot. Glenn Greenwald is a defender of the truth, right? And I admire Glenn Greenwald for being able to have discernment about the truth, despite his identity, right? What am I saying? He's not afraid to talk about anything, even if his people get mad at him for talking about it. And I'll let Glenn talk about this with his own mouth, right? But that's a lot to do, because when you go against your people, like I said, when I told people I was voting for Trump, not my closest friends, but people online, they were like, yo, you just want to be white, you just want to like all this other stuff. There's people online. So it's not easy to do, but it has to be done, because the truth lands where it falls. And so are you going to defend the truth, or are you going to just be cool and just not talk about it? Glenn Greenwald worked with Eric Snowden and gave up the tapes on how we were being followed, the mass surveillance, right? So here's just a little something. And so we're gonna do, okay.
He had to hide it from his girlfriend, who he wanted to marry. That was they were totally in love, but he couldn't have her know anything because she would have then been complicit, and he was concerned she'd be vulnerable. They would go after her, start charging her with their crimes to get at him. So we had to keep it all from her. He just disappeared. He was like, I need to go on a trip related to business.
So, I mean, you're describing one of the most ethical people I've ever met, one of the most principled people ever.
Totally.
It's kind of revealing that he's considered
the criminal number one. Criminal, yeah, because he actually exposed real crimes, and that's what always happened, is the people who expose the crimes. I mean, Daniel Ellsberg had documents showing that the U.S. government was telling American citizens they knew they were going to win the war at exactly the same time. Internally, they said they knew they could never win the war in Vietnam. And did
you hear what he said? So guys, like I said, this is Glenn Greenwald, journalist. This is what real journalism is, who worked with Eric Snowden to pull out the truth that the government does surveil the people, constantly. They're probably surveilling me now, right now. I'm making this video, so it is what it is. But do you hear that? So there was a gentleman, Ellsberg, who saw that they were telling the people, the citizens, that we can win the Vietnam War. But when he's looking at the back, the messaging from the back end, it's we know we can't win. This is how they lie. This is how they lie. They know for a fact we can't win, but they come and they lie and they tell you that we can. And they're doing it now with Ukraine. This is what they do.
Many other lies too. It was Daniel Ellsberg worked at the highest levels of the government forever. I mean, he got a PhD in nuclear policy, and then was at the Rand Corporation with some of the most secret access ever. And then he just couldn't believe what he was seeing, inside these documents, comparing them to the public statements. And he was like, "How am I going to live with myself for the rest of my life if I don't, make this known?" And he was exactly the same thing. But of course, at the time, he was completely vilified as a traitor, a Russian agent, the whole thing.
A hater of America.
Yeah. I mean, everybody who wasn't on the left hated Daniel Ellsberg. And the only reason he didn't spend the rest of his life in prison is because of the misconduct of they broke into a psychoanalyst office to try and discover his psychosexual secrets to discredit him for. That was that whole CIA group.
So there's that, right? So that's him explaining just the lies, and how now the left doesn't even criticize the three-letter agencies and all of that.
Well, this is when we chat anyway. This is how we chat. So I was like, okay, we're just waiting until. But yeah.
So the Irish exit, and I'm not Irish for the record, but is when you sort of leave without saying anything. This is the Irish entrance. You sort of start without saying anything.
Exactly. Just sit down and start with no formal start. Yeah, but I mean, that to me, because it's always so bizarre to me that, for a long time, I was considered, a left-wing kind of leading journalist and finger. And then at some point, with the emergence of Trump, I had this huge breach with the left, and my allies started becoming people on the right. I think that's now changed a little bit more since October 7th and the like, but I haven't changed a single one of my views. I think the primary the two primary views that I hold that used to be identified with the left that are now identified with the right is free speech.
Yes.
Which began as a left-wing movement. I mean, the free speech movement began at Berkeley. Some of the most important First Amendment free speech precedents were written by the most left-wing journalists, and like it was left-wing Jewish lawyers at the ACLU who are fighting for the most absolutist versions of free speech, and now free speech codes as a fascist value. And then the second is this critical scrutiny and focus that I've always had on the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, and that too now codes as right wing. And the reason for that is so disturbing. It's because those agencies became among the leading enemies of the Trump campaign and then the Trump presidency. That's where Russiagate came from, was from the bowels of the CIA, the FBI. They were anonymous.
So he's breaking it down, and he's talking about how the left used to criticize the intel agencies. They don't anymore. Like all of these things. That's why I don't say the left anymore. I don't. I say the people of the state and the people not of the state. That's why I say establishment people and non-establishment people or anything else like that, because it's all like they put us in this fake war of like left, right. When I see today, the right is just all about censorship the same way how the left is about censorship too now. Like it's all the same. You know, the right will label you and cancel you. And they weren't always like that, but there's one particular subject that makes them this way. And that is a problem. But there is a particular point where he gets into, I mean, this is a good interview, but he talks about, and I have to see the exact timestamp when this happens, about, you know, Ben Shapiro, another one of the right, who is becoming extremely like full of hypocrisy. Like it's just kind of odd the way how people are switching up. Like it really is. And this is, again, I'm going to let Glenn Greenwald tell the story, right? I'll just let him talk.
Been like incredibly steadfast to the point where AIPAC tried to take him out and failed. He just won his primary with like 76. But overwhelmingly, the pro-Israel sector of the American right has proven itself to be such utter and complete frauds about virtually every value they've spent the last decade pretending to champion and believe in. And it's been
sickening to watch. That's exactly what's going on. The doxing that's coming from the right is of extraordinary levels. The right has written anti-Semitic speech laws, all kinds of things. Like it is insane what is happening in this country. It really is. I never thought I would see the day where there's actual hate speech laws being written. I don't like any hate speech laws, you know, especially as a Black woman. I certainly don't like it. I'm like, abolish these terms.
Sickening to watch.
The reason it's scary is, again, has nothing to do with Israel at all, about which I have like less emotion than most Americans, apparently. I just don't care that much either way. But what's scary is if there's an alignment between left and right, which is to say everyone with institutional
you know what?
power,
I think I've skipped it. Hold
on the question of speech. In other words, if you say something I don't like, I can put you in jail. Then it's a totalitarian country.
By definition. There is all the time, but few people cared. Finally, those cases got brought to the courts, and thankfully, courts have overwhelmingly, almost unanimously said this is a grave violation of the First Amendment and are being struck down. But I'll tell you something so amazing. This just kind of encapsulates it for me. So Ben Shapiro, a good friend of yours, and a longtime political ally, obviously one of the main kind of unifying views of conservatives is that we shouldn't have jobs set aside for certain groups. We shouldn't have, shouldn't judge people based on the color of their skin or their ethnic group when hiring.
Or their religion, or it should be a meritocracy. Or can you do the job best?
Exactly. So Palantir, which is a intelligence an intelligence corporation that was started by Peter Thiel, and that has all kinds of contracts with the CIA, the Defense Department, but it's run by Jewish vocal supporters of Israel, announced in October or November, after hearing all this stuff about Jewish students being discriminated against because of their views or whatever. And it was never really Jewish students. It was pro-Israel students who support the war, because a lot of these protests have overwhelming numbers of Jews inside these protests. Protests against Israel. Yeah, so it's not a hostility toward Jews, it's a hostility toward anyone who supports this war that they're protesting against. Palantir announced that they were creating 180 new jobs that were available exclusively for Jewish students on campus who felt like they were being made uncomfortable. It was 180 jobs. No Christians could apply, no Muslims could apply, no atheists could apply. no black people, only for Jews. Ben Shapiro saw that, and he went onto Twitter, and above that Palantir announcement said something like, wow, this is fantastic. And then after his own followers spent the day saying, what do you mean? This is exactly the thing you're supposed to oppose. At the end of the day, he was kind of forced to say, yeah, you know what? Maybe it would be best if it were open to everybody. But then, like, what's the point of the announcement? He would never have commented on. Obviously, he was happy about that. Barry Weiss, same thing. You know, Ms. like anti-woke. This is identity politics as pure as it gets, creating 180 jobs solely for Jewish students. And it's, I think, very hard to make the case that Jewish Americans are like an endangered or marginalized minority in the United States. Very, very hard to make that case. When she saw that announcement, she put this like very excitement, wow, on top of it. And so you
see the hypocrisy, right? And we can even leave it there. And this is, and again, let me just say it for the disclaimer, something that I really hate doing, but Glenn Greenwald is a Jewish man calling out the hypocrisy. This is not easy for somebody to do when you're talking about your own people again, but you have to do it, right? I'm one who's not for affirmative action. You know, people assume that because I'm black that I just like affirmative action. Once I figured out what affirmative action was and the fact that like I possibly were, that's hilarious, that I possibly was getting, positions because I was checking off black. Like, I didn't know I was younger, so I just thought like, oh, they just want to know your race, I guess, but I was checking. Once I figured out what was going on, I stopped checking off. I was like, will not say, I'm not saying it. If my resume, number one, is not good enough for the gig, I don't want the gig. That's number one. Number two, I don't want to take away from somebody else. Because guess what? There might be somebody else that's better than me. I'm not perfect. I didn't get straight A's. I think I'm a pretty good nurse. There might be somebody who's a better nurse, right? And I don't want to take away from them simply because I'm a black woman. Okay, coming back to the point. But these are conservative values. Like, these are values that, like, where you believe in meritocracy, where God, like, you work hard for what you're supposed to get, right? Like, you work for it. Okay. But like he said, when Palantir said we're going to put out, and I remember that tweet, 180 positions for only Jewish students. Whatever, it's your business. You do whatever you want with it, right? Like, I'm not going to go over here and protest it. You do whatever you want. But I'm also not going to big it up. Ben Shapiro bigged it up. And that's why people always keep calling out Ben Shapiro's hypocrisy. It never fails. Like, it just doesn't fail. Because when it comes, he doesn't do what Glenn Greenwald is doing, right? He doesn't do that, right? He just is, he's a hypocrite. He is. And so a lot of conservatives, what I saw, and what Glenn Greenwald said too, as far as with the protest, yes, there were a lot of Jewish people there. It's funny because I remember when God, I have anxiety for this. When all of this first started, and I saw like the Torah Jews or whatever who were talking about like that they were not for Israel and free Palestine and everything. I remember I asked a conservative radio station host, I was like, well, what about those Jewish people who, like, there's overwhelmingly like a lot of Jewish people protesting against this. And then they said to me that they were the bad Jews. I was like, I'm back on the left again. Like, because this is what the left used to say about me, about being black and thinking like a Republican, right? So I'm like it was whiplash, and it has been whiplash in the past 9 months. It's been total whiplash of like how the hypocrisy is overwhelming coming from the right. And why it's overwhelming? It's like because we expect the left engages in communism and Marxism in your face. But apparently what I'm finding out is that so does the right, but they just do it covertly, and I have a problem with that. And so I don't identify as a Republican anymore. Like, I don't like, because nobody's doing what Republicans are supposed to do. Everybody's just kind of just doing their own thing and figuring out like how to get over on the next person. That's how I feel, right? And you have Ben Shapiro, the Daily Wire. No disrespect to the Daily Wire, whatever. Again, get your bag, however you need to get your bag. But you came across and said that you were all about freedom of speech and all this other stuff. Freedom, 1776, or whatever else it is that people say. And then, but when it came to Israel, all bets are off. Shut it down. I don't care about your First, Second, or Third Amendment rights. Shut it down. And that to me is very disingenuous when this is supposed to be your platform. So there's that.